Circle who are joining us virtually with us today. I would like to start off by requesting Ms. Devika Shekhawat, Director tGELF, to welcome all our guests today.
Thank you, Karan. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to apologize for the delay. As you all know, Delhi rains in traffic. Everyone's a little bit delayed, but we go with Indian Standard Time. So apologies for that. And welcome to everyone joining globally who are already joined and been waiting. So sorry for that. I want to welcome all of you to the V20 Road to V20 Brazil India edition. It's an absolute honor to welcome all of you here today. I'd also like to talk a little bit about Values 20 as some of you may be new to this community and joining for the first time. Values 20 is a global community of value experts that seek to actively engage with the group of 20, which is the G20. We want to add depth of understanding of values in public policy with the goal of providing G20 with evidence-based, human-centered policies and that contribute to global challenges that all of us are facing today. The Values 20 was formed by the founding circle, a group of passionate value experts, leaders, and practitioners from across the G20 countries. The initiative began in 2020, with Saudi Arabia being the first country to hold V20 Summit back in 2020, where our founding members united to support G20 leaders for the global community by developing policies grounded in values and building momentum for a global action. Since then, V20 has grown, and Italy hosted in 2021, moved to Indonesia, and then came to India last year, which tGELF hosted very proudly. This year, it's moved to Brazil, and Brazil, which is Ines and team who've joined us online, have taken over the leadership this year. The vision of V20 is closely aligned to that of our foundation, the Global Education and Leadership Foundation, which had the honor of hosting V20 last year. We are extremely honored to be the strategic partner for V20 this year in Brazil. As a foundation, we're committed to identifying and nurturing leadership skills in individuals rooted with values, ethics, altruism, and a decisive action. Our value-based leadership curriculum has trained over 3 million young students each year, focusing on concepts like global citizenship, ethics, altruism, and collaboration. India, as all of you know, has a great tradition in values reflected in the mantra Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means the world is one family, which guided India's presidency last year, placing values and spirituality at the center of global thinking and action. During our presidency, V20 India explored the theme Lead with Values. Again, most of you would be familiar. LEAD is tGELF's core philosophy, which is leadership, ethics, altruism, and decisive action. Our focus last year was on education, employment and entrepreneurship, and environment, which fostered collaboration and innovation, all anchored by the pillars of LEAD. At the summit, which was a culmination of a year-long effort to meaningfully engage and contribute to the G20, the event brought together over 25,000 attendees globally the entire year. We had about 2,000 delegates. We received 50 policy recommendations, curated from 100 abstracts written by 85 authors. We summarized all of that into the V20 India communique, which was published last year. At the registration, we do have a few copies of the communique, and we would encourage anyone who has not read the policy document to please read it and take it. We would also like to show you a little throwback video from last year with all the work we've done, highlighting the progress made and the values-driven impact we've collectively achieved. I'd request to play the video, please.
is steadily progressing towards the G20 Leaders Summit, which will be held on 9th and 10th September in New Delhi. The broad theme of India's G20 presidency has been Vasudev Kutumbakam. There is one earth, one family, one future.
Starting with the Industrial Revolution, I think the world is in a much better place in many ways for each of us in terms of the way we live, at least for the people that can afford it.
With an ancient Sanskrit prayer to Goddess Earth, Prithvitvaya Dhrita Loka, Devi Tvam Vishnuna Dhrita.
Can feel what happens when a group of human beings comes together around the topic of values in such a committed...
The values path you set out is a key factor in not just India's future, but will contribute to the future of humanity enjoys on planet.
And all of this is coming together against the backdrop of the greatest existential crisis of all, climate change.
If I have to speak about Egypt here and values, I will have to take you through a journey in history.
Thank you. As we reflect on these achievements, let it inspire us to continue building on this foundation, driving forward with renewed purpose and collaboration to tackle the challenges ahead at the V20 Brazil Summit later this year. Today, we will be diving into different topics of the V20 Brazil's task force, which are ecological transition and nature wisdom, evolutionary education, and inclusive leadership, which are central to Brazil's vision of building an inclusive and sustainable planet. We also have an interactive roundtable session planned, where we hope to hear from everyone in greater depth on the task forces, drawing from their unique experiences and perspectives. Before we kickstart the event, I'd like to thank a few people, specifically the founding circle who've joined from all over and are on Zoom. They can see us. Soon they will be presented here on the screen. So thank you so much for joining and giving us support and guidance throughout. I'd also like to thank Miss Regina, who's the V20 Brazil Sherpa, Ines, who's really the heart and soul for this year's Brazil initiative, the Brazil chair, and the entire Values Move team and the UNGC Brazil team for taking this initiative forward in Brazil. Along with this, I'd also like to thank everyone present here for taking the time out and being with us today. A warm welcome again, and let's begin the Road to V20 Brazil India edition. Thank you.
Thank you, Devika. I would like to request Ambassador Monica Kapil Mohta, V20 India Sherpa, Mrs. Urvashi Khemka, Vice Chair tGELF, and Mrs. Gauri Ishwaran, V20 India Co-Chair and Vice Chair tGELF, to join Mr. Marcos Perandio and Mr. Pramath Raj Sinha to light the ceremonial lamp of knowledge. Thank you so much, everyone. I would now like to invite Ambassador Monica Kapil Mohta, V20 India Sherpa, to address our gathering. Ambassador Mohta is an Indian civil servant of the IFS cadre and has rendered 36 years of distinguished service as a career diplomat. She has promoted India's trade and investment interests in several European and Asian countries. She has been instrumental in coordinating India's cultural outreach and external publicity. We welcome you, ma'am.
You have it here already. Thank you. Namaskar. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. A very warm welcome to all of you. It is a profound privilege to stand before you here today as we gather to mark a significant milestone in our journey, one that I was part of in India. The transition to Brazil not only symbolizes the passing of the G20 presidency, but also reflects our unwavering commitment to the values that unite us, values that transcend borders, cultures, and governments. When we convened in India last under the theme Lead with Values, we laid the foundation for a global dialogue that places human values at the heart of policy making. We focused on education, employment, entrepreneurship, and environment, areas critical to shaping a future that is inclusive, sustainable, and just. Anchored by the pillars of leadership, ethics, altruism, and decisive action, this novel initiative has nurtured transformative ideas to its impeccable execution, all brought together in a cohesive manner by the V20 summit in New Delhi in 2023. Our collective efforts have demonstrated that values are not just abstract ideals, but powerful catalysts for real-world change. Today, as we prepare for V20 Brazil Summit, under the theme Values, Visions, the Collaborative Advantage, we are called to build upon this foundation, and Brazil, with its rich cultural heritage and diverse ecosystems, offers a unique perspective on the global challenges that we face. The task forces in energetic transition, inclusive leadership, evolutionary education, and AI and digital ethics reflect the breadth and depth of the discussions we need to have as we confront the complexities of our times. Brazil's approach to the V20 presidency has been marked by collaboration, inclusivity, and equity. We have amplified the voices of the Global South, ensuring that their perspectives and aspirations are heard on the global stage. We at Values 20 have strived to provide values-focused, human-centered policy solutions to the G20 for the 5th consecutive year. India, Brazil, and Indonesia, the Troika, are, as a part of the Global South, share a deep commitment to addressing the challenges that confront our world today. Challenges like climate change, inequality, the need for sustainable development. The task forces established under the Indian and Brazilian V20 presidencies are deeply interconnected, reflecting our shared priorities. For instance, while India's focus on education, employment, and entrepreneurship aligns with Brazil's emphasis on evolutionary education, digital transformation, and inclusive growth, our collective work on the environment and energetic transition speaks directly to Brazil's focus on sustainable development and nature-based economic transformation. Brazil's three-point G20 agenda echoes the values-driven approach India championed during its presidency. As Brazil took up the mantle, it built upon the foundation laid by India, continuing the work of prioritizing the needs of the global South in global forums. But while the focus has shifted from India to Brazil, the essence of our mission remains unchanged. We continue to advocate for values-driven solutions that prioritize the well-being of people and that of the planet. We continue to believe that by working together, by collaborating across borders, we can achieve outcomes that are greater than the sum of our individual efforts. The road to V20 Brazil marks the continuation of the effort put in by the global network of Values 20 members to take the contribution of Values 20 to greater prominence within the G20 presidency and build momentum for global action. Throughout this process, we have witnessed the exchange of best practices and innovative approaches through multiple cross-pollination, informational, and discussion sessions. Delegates from various backgrounds and sectors have come together, learning from one another's experience and forging partnerships that amplify the impact of their initiatives. As we reflect on the challenges that lie before us, we recognize that the solutions can only be found through collective efforts. Governments, academia, civil society, and the private sector must work hand in hand, transcending borders and embracing innovative approaches. It is through cross-sectoral partnerships and holistic solutions that we can address these challenges and forge a more sustainable future. As we stand on the threshold of V20 Brazil, I'm filled with hope and optimism. The continuity between V20 India and V20 Brazil is not merely symbolic. It is a living, breathing connection that reflects our shared values and common goals. The events leading up to V20 Brazil Summit, including this one today, are a testament to the enduring partnership that we have between India and Brazil. Both nations are bound by a deep commitment to democracy, diversity, and development principles that have guided us in the past and will continue to illuminate our path forward. In closing, I want to express my gratitude to Ines Medeiros, V20 Brazil Chair, Regina Esteves, V20 Brazil Sherpa, and the Values Move team for their dedication and enthusiasm in carrying forward the V20 mantle. A very special thank you from my heart to Shiv and Urvashi Khemka, to Gauri Ishwaran, and to the entire tGELF team for inviting me to be part of this journey. You know, there is an old adage in India. In fact, I'll relate a very small example of that. Once a spiritual master was asked a question, "Master, what is the path to fulfillment?" And the master replied, "Fulfillment itself is the path." So it's been a great journey for me. Thank you very much, tGELF. Thank you very much, V20. Together, we have embarked on this journey. We have achieved something. I'm confident that we will continue to advance the cause of values-driven policy solutions, creating a world where collaboration and shared values lead us to a brighter future. I wish Brazil all the best in this endeavor. We are with you. Let's all come together to build a collaborative future with values at the center. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. We request you to accept a token of our appreciation. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Inês Medeiros, V20 Brazil Chair, Founder and CEO, Values Move, to address our audience on the vision and mission of Values 20 Brazil. Ms. Inês Medeiros has worked as a psychologist, media executive, human development consultant, and high leadership coach in Portugal and Latin America for the last 20 years. As a cultural transformation agent supporting Brazilian and multinational companies, she has led and participated in change management and leadership development projects. In 2019, she launched the values-driven systemic decision-making program, Aurora, dedicated to strengthening meaningful education and teachers as early leaders with social impact. To share and disseminate learning, she acts as a BVC global partner and trainer, helping to expand the global network of consultants certified in the Barrett Model Cultural Transformation Methodology. We welcome you, Inês.
Hello to you all. Please tell me if you can hear me. I feel very lonely in this Zoom screen, but at the same time hugged by all the V20 community. What a beautiful and wonderful day to be with all of you. First of all, I would like to thank you to all the founding group and the V20 community about the opportunity for Values Move to be the organizer of V20 Brazil 2024 edition. So thank you for this opportunity for us to continue the beautiful journey, the amazing journey that India passed the baton to us. More than this, I would like to thank you also to the strategic partners that made this step forward in the V20 journey by having this road to V20 Brazil, starting with India edition. This is something amazing. We are living what we say, values as a collaborative advantage, not only talking about values, but showing that transnational, multilateral connections are possible when values are our values-based decision is our core. So thank you to all of you that are in person in India and all over the globe in our community seeing this transmission. I hope and I wish, and I'm sure in a very soon time, we will all together be in Brazil, sharing wisdom, knowledge, and bringing the singularity of each location where values are the basis of a sustainable, just, and inclusive world. By the moment of the G20 presidency, with the efforts of our country, we are having some actions that surely are based on values. The recent launch of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, the officialization of Oceans 20, connecting the importance of climate change and energetic transition, it's totally aligned with the task forces we chose for this V20 Journey 2024. More than this, recently I had the beautiful news that G20 Favelas, another engagement group, was officialized by President Lula. And that means that, again, we are bringing floor and voice to a multiplicity of people all around the world. And that is, again, totally aligned with what we are bringing in our communique this year as inclusive leadership. Global South, and I would say all life forms in the planet, are at this moment at the core of the decision-making of G20. For that, so, without further notice, I pass the floor to India. I would like to, again, thank you to tGELF, our courageous and brave first strategic partner initiating this road to V20 Brazil India. My special thanks to Mr. Shiv Kanka for all the efforts he has been making, not only in India, but collaborating with the Team Brazil. And also, I could not end this communication without saying thank you to the founding group, and a very from the heart thank you to Marisa, Dima, that always has been surrounding us, and my dearest Devika, how much I long to be with you and embrace you in this special moment. So, dear all, let the day begin, or afternoon, whatever it is, but so happy to be with you all today. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Medeiros. Next, I would like to invite Mrs. Gauri Ishwaran, V20 India co-chair and vice chair tGELF, to address our gathering. A recipient of the Padma Shri Award in 2004, Mrs. Gauri Ishwaran is an innovative educationist with over 30 years of experience in leading schools in India. With a very clear vision of the type of educational experience and nurturing that children deserve, she has brought a paradigm shift on how education needs to be imparted to young students. Her expertise lies in creating a value-based curriculum focusing on inclusive education for children with special needs and the socially disadvantaged. Her guiding philosophy is to educate each child to grow into a caring, sensitive, responsible citizen of the world. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, Khan. Very warm welcome to everybody present over here. I think Devika did an amazing job in letting you know all about the background of V20, and Ambassador Mota gave the depth to it. So I don't plan to inflict more of that on you all, but I'd like to speak about this from a different perspective, which from a layman's perspective in a way. First and foremost, I think not enough credit has been given to the founding circle, because everybody talks about doing good things, and wherever we go there is talk about we should do this, we should do that. But here's a group of people who actually got together and created this V20 family, which is so much the need of the hour today. Here I would also like to highlight the role played by tGELF. tGELF was created based on values. The whole idea of tGELF was to work with young people so that they imbibe and grow with values as fundamental to their own character and to the choices that they make in life. So tGELF was the perfect fit actually for Values 20, and Mr. Shiv Khemka has been the driving force behind it. Another thing that we should note is that very often organizations begin and fritter away, but look at the journey of V20. It started in Saudi Arabia, went on to Italy, carried on further in Indonesia, then in India, then it's going on to Brazil. So it is thematically vibrant and dynamic. And that's what we need today. Anything passive is not going to have any impact. It has to be something dynamic. Second thing I would like, especially for lay people to understand, that many of the policies that are taken across the world in different countries, they're all centered on the individual's aspirations. Leaders don't seem to be so bothered about what's going to happen to this planet 30 years from now. What is good for my people? How am I going to give better health to the citizens of the country? Instead of that, policies kind of wind up looking at how will I get votes? How do I keep myself in power? So it's all becoming individual-centric. And in this world of technology and artificial intelligence, it's very easy to become individual-centric. Because all that you see in the social media is it's myself, about myself. Everything emanates from yourself. And we have to reverse that. And if we are going to counter that from the AI and technology point of view, the answer is through education. Because after all, if we talk about values, values don't just jump down from the sky. It's something that grows within you. Now, how do you get those values to grow? It is again through education. Because the civic engagement here is the most important. Because when you look at our leaders, where do they come from? They come from amongst us. They're not from anywhere else. So, unless we have society that focuses on empathy and compassion and collaboration, and it becomes fundamental to the choices and to the character of individuals, things will not change. And that is why something like Values 20 is so very important. You know, people have commented to me, oh, it's a small group, what impact will you have? I said, you know, how does a sculptor create a statue? He chips away. So a group like Values 20 will chip away. And someday or the other, groups like G20 or G7 or G whatever will have people who will take decisions based on values. And if we want to save our planet, that is what we require. And therefore, kudos to Values 20. The tGELF team has worked very hard. And one of the fundamental reasons why Devika and people and Kern and others are running around like this is that we don't want this V20 initiative to collapse or disappear. We want it to not just continue, but to go stronger, to have impact, and maybe people will start listening to us someday. So thank you for listening to my little homily. Good luck to everyone, and many thanks to all those who have come. Devika and Monica have thanked everybody. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Ishwaran. I would now like to invite Mr. Pramath Raj Sinha, founder and trustee, Ashoka University, founder and chairman, Harappa Education, and founding dean, Indian School of Business, to deliver our keynote address. Mr. Sinha is a pioneering force in Indian higher education. He is the founder and chairman of Harappa Education, now part of Upgrad, which strives to become India's largest online institution focused on teaching habits and skills critical to workplace success in the 21st century. He is the founding dean and a member of the executive board of ISB, which rapidly became one of the top 20 business schools in the world. He is also the founder and trustee of the acclaimed Ashoka University, a liberal arts university which launched the popular Young India Fellowship. He has also been a media entrepreneur, education consultant, and management advisor at the 9.9 Group, which he founded, and a partner at McKinsey & Company. Academics, however, are his first love. He received a PhD and an MSc from the University of Pennsylvania and a BTech from IIT Kanpur, where he was honored with the Distinguished Alumnus Award in 2018. We welcome you, Mr. Sinha.
Apologies for the long introduction. I don't know what I'm doing here. I think I'm truly the layperson in the room because when I was asked to speak, I just said yes, because I'm the first group of students that Mrs. Ishwaran ever taught. And when your teacher calls, and that too on the day after Teacher's Day, you don't say no. I'm also very grateful to Shiv and Urvashi for always remembering me for these occasions, but also for the support that you've given to this initiative. Clearly, you've been the force behind this. So really grateful to be here. The only problem is that I didn't know what to say about evolutionary education. So I went to ChatGPT and Gemini to find out more. And they have clearly not evolved. So I ended up getting a lot of homilies, Mrs. Ishwaran, on evolutionary biology and how evolutionary education was all about biology and science and so on. Then thankfully you had sent me some notes, so I won't embarrass you today. what I did understand was that this was really about providing holistic education that would inculcate in our leaders the kind of values that Mrs. Ishwaran was talking about. At least as a lay person, that's what I understand this means. And it also talked about education that encourages young people to engage with some of the complex challenges that we face as a world and some of the societal challenges and implications of that. And that seems something that I can say a few things about. I'd like to just make 3 points based on some of the experiences I've had in building Ashoka primarily, but also in some of the other educational institutions that I've been involved in, and also my own personal experiences and my experiences with young people today. The first thing I want to say is that to me, evolutionary education is education that has meaning and purpose attached to it. And I'll tell you what I mean. When I was growing up, we were crazy about studying science. We were crazy about becoming a doctor or an engineer. I studied metallurgical engineering, as was mentioned at IIT Kanpur. And I really didn't care why I was studying metallurgical engineering. And in fact, went on to do a PhD in robotics. But honestly, the work that I did was at that time driven by a big grant from NASA, and it was all about space exploration and so on. We were all taught to be fascinated about the subject, but there really wasn't any motivation or pressure to think about how it would solve for societal challenges or the future of humanity or how it would actually affect the world. And I do think that where things have to change, given the grand, big, wicked problems we face as a human race, where education does need to evolve to the point where we are thinking about how are we going to use the education to connect with some of the problems that we are facing as a world. At Ashoka, we've tried to do that. We've tried to do that in setting up centers which students work as part of and introducing that notion early in their education so that they actually get to work on real world problems. It's very tough to change academics. I was an academic once, so I can make a remark about that. So people will still focus on metallurgical engineering and they will still focus on robotics. But I think what we have tried to do is create groups of academics and students and get them focused around solving a particular problem. And I think the exposure to real problems is where you then start to inculcate an awareness that what they have to, their place in the world is more than just getting an education and then getting a job. And at least I've found that to be very helpful. Just to give you an example, we have a center for people-centric energy transition. So now while everybody is talking about creating lithium batteries or solar cells to challenge the domination of carbon fuels, what impact it has on people is something that we don't hear about too much, and communities and people who are dependent on fossil fuel for a living. And to get young people to start to appreciate that at an early stage is an important aspect of what I think you are talking about in evolutionary education. So one is connecting your education and finding ways for people to be able to relate what they are studying with what might be a bigger problem in the world. And it's okay for you to go get a job and make money, but creating that sensibility early enough in life, I think, will convince people to maybe do something about it, even if it's on voluntary time to begin with, before they fully commit to doing something. The second aspect to evolutionary education that I think is also very important is that I'd like to say that most of our education is you teach people in the classroom. There's an expert, there's somebody knowledgeable, somebody who's a scholar, somebody who's an academic, who's got lots of knowledge, and you teach people. And the expectation is that they will learn and then they will go out in the world and do something. So it's always has been a learn to do model. And I think in evolutionary education, you have to start thinking about a additional aspect, which is a do to learn model. And people call it different things. People call it experiential learning. People call it project-based learning, and so on, which is the idea that, you need to get your hands dirty also to learn, and that it's not just about learning in the classroom. Interestingly, this is embodied in our ancient scriptures, where in some of our ancient texts, it's mentioned that you learn in 4 ways. You learn from your teacher, you learn from your peers, you learn from your experience, which I think is the do to learn bit that I'm talking about, and then you learn from self-reflection, which of course is the other aspect of do to learn as well. It's only when you actually go out and work on some of the challenges that you face in the world that you start reflecting on who you are and what your purpose is and what are you good at and what are things that you need to change. So the second aspect that I want to emphasize is the aspect of saying, let's bring more practical learning from doing elements. And I think the current national education policy has in fact advocated that as well. Today you can now legitimately earn credits for doing internships as part of your undergraduate program. This was not possible before, interestingly enough. So you can actually do community work and earn the same credits as you would for sitting in a classroom, which is actually quite path-breaking as far as regulations go in our own country. I think the last thing is perhaps a bit of a recursive idea, in the sense that while we are talking about evolutionary education, I think evolutionary education itself has to become more inclusive and accessible. The big problem, at least in our country, I don't know how, I haven't looked at the figures in Brazil and other countries, is that basic quality education is not available to very large numbers of our students. And if you just don't have access, where are you going to provide them evolutionary education? Because there's no education. And most of our children, the poor quality of education that is present in schools, we have declared that every child in India up to grade 8 goes to school, and that the attrition starts after that. But you and I know what the quality of that education is, and there are ASER tests and PISA tests to show that the outcomes are just not there. College education is worse. We have a system which is one of the largest in the world, but only about 25% of our adults of college going age are able to afford to get into a university or get into a university. So while this may not be a point about how education evolves, I think for countries like India and many other parts of the world, the tragedy is that education is still not touching people. And one of the challenges of educational, and therefore the way it's recursive is, I feel that one of the challenges of evolutionary education, especially those of us who are involved in evolutionary education, is to take it to as many people as possible, because there is otherwise no point in talking about it. These are some short ideas that I wanted to share with you, and just wanted to summarize that the way I see it, there are really 3 parts to it. One is to genuinely help young people connect what they are studying, the majors they are doing, the programs they are enrolled in, with how it might contribute to society and leave the world a better place. Not just in terms of employment. Second, to bring in as much as what I call do to learn, in addition to learn to do, into the curriculum, so that people pick up practical skills. Mrs. Ishwaran talked about lots of people talking about values, but not enough people doing something about that. And I think getting a sense of commitment to doing is the second aspect that I want to emphasize. And the third one is more a challenge. Think of it as an opportunity, may not fit quite the definition of evolutionary education, but I feel strongly about all education, and particularly for us in India, that it really is not accessible to as many people as it should be. Those are the few ideas I wanted to share with you. I hope it befits a keynote address. I don't know what grade my teacher will give me today, but thank you very much for inviting me for this, and I'm very privileged to be part of this audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha. We request you to accept a token of our appreciation. We would also like to invite Mr. Marco Sperandio to accept a token of our gratitude as well as our guest of honor. Thank you, Mr. Sperandio. Now the time has come to begin the much-awaited panel discussion on a crucial topic that is at the intersection of technology, business, public policy, and values, which is pathways to equitable energy transition for the global south. As the world navigates an unprecedented energy shift, ensuring that developing regions are not left behind is paramount. The global south faces unique challenges, ranging from energy access and infrastructure gaps to financing and policy frameworks that demand innovative, inclusive solutions. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from our distinguished panelists from within the tGELF and V20 family, who bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to shed light on the challenges and opportunities associated with the topic at hand. Firstly, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Mr. Sukrit Malik. Mr. Sukrit Malik is the co-founder and CEO of Energia, a BEE empaneled energy service company dedicated to helping industrial and commercial facilities reduce energy costs and carbon emissions. Energia works with leading companies like PepsiCo Incorporated, Mitsubishi Electric, LG Electronics, and ABB to optimize utilities such as compressed air, steam, chilled water, and on-site power generation. They work across the developing world in India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, the Middle East, and Western Africa. Before founding Energia, Sukrit worked at Fidelity Labs, focusing on AI and blockchain technologies within financial services, and at EOS GmbH in Munich, where he specialized in market penetration strategy for additive manufacturing. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Malik. I request you to kindly join us on stage. Our first panelist of the day is Ms. Shubha Raha. Ms. Raha leads CEEW's international cooperation portfolio spanning 4 regions: Asia-Oceania, Africa, MENA, Europe, and the Americas, and is a member of the CEO's Foresight team. She drives global governance-centric energy development climate initiatives amidst geo-economic transformations, covering energy and resource security, decarbonization, sustainable finance, sustainable production and consumption, and climate resilience. She engages with governments, industry, and institutions to impact sustainable development at scale, expand CEEW's influence as a voice for emerging economies, and take the India story global. We welcome you, ma'am. I request you to kindly join us on stage. I would now like to welcome Mr. Kinsuk Shukla. Mr. Shukla is a senior manager at Climate Group India. He has a diversified and cross-sectorial experience spanning approximately 20 years in the government, private, and not-for-profit setups in various facets of economic development. He has worked in strategic roles at Invest India and Enterprise SG. He oversees the energy and industry-related work at the Climate Group. We welcome you, sir. And last but not the least, I would like to welcome Ms. Manna Jaspal. Ms. Jaspal is an associate fellow with the Climate and Energy Vertical at the Observer Research Foundation. Her research focuses on the geopolitics of energy transition, sustainable finance, and carbon markets. ORF is a Delhi-based global think tank that provides independent analysis on security, strategy, economy, development, energy, and resources. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. Without further ado, let us commence this panel discussion and embark on a journey of exploration, inspiration, and transformative ideas. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introductions. I'm going to say that for all of us. It's a pleasure to be sitting on stage here today. My journey, other than that of being a CEO of a company that works on the energy transition, actually our relationship with tGELF goes much further back than that. The first time I was actually exposed to values-based education was in high school, and that was because of tGELF. Having gone through the very experience that Ms. Ishwaran was talking about, as well as Pramath was talking about as far as experiential education goes, I can say as lived experience, it has had a critical impact in how you get to see problems, how you get to see equity, inclusivity, and justice in the larger world that we live in. There is a clear need for a fair, equitable, and just energy transition. And this poses especially difficult problems for the global south. And I think this panel here today, endeavors to try and answer some of these questions or highlight the challenges that we deal with as we operate within this world. I think the key highlights as far as India and Brazil's roles within values-based leadership, as well as the energy transition, extend to movements like the Global Biofuels Alliance, or even considering the doubling of the pace of energy efficiency as a commitment during the G20. I feel that the energy transition, especially if you want to do it in a just fashion, and you have to do it in a way that is technologically empowering, has to be something that is led by countries like India and Brazil, because we don't share the same problems of the developed world. The approaches to those solutions, the bottom-up approach to solving is something that would have to come from within us, as opposed to, be learned experience from the West. So I'm going to start off this panel with just getting some introductory thoughts from all the speakers on what a sustainable, just, equitable, inclusive transition looks like for you. And then perhaps we can delve a little deeper.
How long do you want to give us each for this?
How about let's do 2 minutes each?
2 minutes each, yeah, cool. So thank you. My privilege to be here and speaking over here. I've been a part of the G20 process for about 4 years now. And I think V20, and it's often, all this alphabet soup, it's called as a T20, B20, V20, F20, etc. But I think V20 kind of sits at the intersection of the economics versus equity conversation. It has a very unique place because G20 initially, before we had this troika and then with South Africa of the so-called global South nations, was seen as an economic grouping. That scope has expanded significantly over the last 3 G20s, and I think Brazil has taken a significant lead from where India and Indonesia left off, and we brought in things like, we brought in the African Union, first of all, India did that. We brought in the Green Development Pact, which sort of got development, energy, environment, equity, all of that put into one basket and not as independent, separate things, which was agreed to by all sorts of countries, including warring factions, which now Brazil has brought in the social justice angle. It has taken the Climate Action Task Force. It's brought in, of course, Biofuels Alliance and all, but those are very specific entities. The bigger question over here is mainstreaming the concept of values, because values over here is not just moral values or ethical values, but also the value of economics itself, or the value of employment, or the value of the environment. I mean, everything has a value attached to it. Right? And we don't want to sort of separate these things and sit in moral judgment and say, oh, because you are thinking of the environment, you have a greater value than somebody who's eking out an employment or livelihood. And it may not be concerned about the environment at that level. So bringing these conversations together, I think, has become very important at this point, so we don't get dislocated and cubbyholed into certain spaces. Or, Values 20 will discuss values in their corner. Right. The other point that I want to make is the question of who decides the values, and in any transition or any financing or any sort of thing, who is deciding for whom? And the crux of the question is over there. So if we look at financing the energy transition, we're looking at certain MDBs, the multilateral banks, or we're looking at the global north, or we're looking at the private sector, or we're looking at, even before that, credit rating agencies, and there are 3 of them deciding who gets financing. Right, so the decision makers of this now need to change. So one of the, and I'll just close and we can come back to this. One of the projects that we are doing right now is to return to the first principles, where we question the question itself of what is the global south. I mean, it's a amorphous grouping of things. And when we start looking at it, and we looked at all 194 countries, we broke it down into 143. We used UNCTAD's economic parameters of the very first sorting. And already we're seeing that countries that are called developed are not meeting the economic parameters of developed. And many developing countries are meeting the developed parameters, so to speak. And this is not even including subjective parameters. And then we are seeing regional groupings don't work. So an Argentina is not the same as a Chile, as a Brazil. They're not, they're very different. They may be similar to Indonesia or something. So saying regional groupings or geographical groupings or economic groupings or just you are in the south groupings or we are the north, you are the south, is coming in the way of everything: financing, traditional knowledge, IPRs, cooperation, who's lending to whom, who's borrowing from whom. So time has come for all of us to really go back to the question itself, that what are we trying to do and what are we trying to achieve. And I like the way you frame this, because your question had the intersection of equity and employment and inclusion from that point of view, and policy making takes into account all of that. It's not unilateral. And I'm hoping we can speak a bit more about that. And I think I've exceeded my 2 minutes. Sorry about that. You can use mine, you can use that one.
Thank you. I represent Climate Group, and we are a non-profit based out of UK. We are known for our demand-side campaigns. We aggregate demand from the industry and then push the supply to provide adequate renewable energy, low-emission steel. So these are our campaigns. I think in the context of India, where we see rapid economic development happening and the expected growth in the next 20, 30 years, for us, while we push a lot of large corporations to procure 100% renewable electricity, it makes a lot of sense and also pressure that the renewable electricity projects that are being developed all across the globe are done in an equitable, just and right manner, protecting the rights of the community. So values for us is very important. I think it's very easy for us to put pressure on companies to go for 100% RE, but then there are downsides of scaling up projects very fast, because very often project developers ignore the basic principles of how of doing things right. So this is again, these are the values which we have sort of imbibed in all our campaigns, and it's very important in the Indian context.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with this lovely panel. So thank you for your question as well. I think to just set the context in the very brief time slot that we have been allotted for this initial remark, I think it's important to understand, by the way, I'm from ORF, the Observer Research Foundation. We're a think tank based in India. And we were also the secretariat for the T20, which is a Think 20 under the Indian G20 presidency, which was a tremendous opportunity and exposure for us to really understand and engage and interact with think tanks and communities from around the world and really understand what the priorities for the Global South countries are. And I think one of the things that we really wanted to push forward was that, unlike in the West, where just transition was purely focused on the coal communities, in developing countries like India, Indonesia, Vietnam, the ambit and scope is way broader. It goes to really, as the preceding speaker before this panel spoke about, people positive transitions. It's way more all-encompassing, and it has a very all-of-economy approach, because we understand that unlike the West, unlike industrialized countries, we do have a development agenda to follow, which will always be a priority for us. And how do we marry that agenda with our transition priorities? So the two need to go hand in hand. It's not purely about looking at the coal community, about moving from fossil to non-fossil fuel sources of energy, but it is more to do with the fact that how do we ensure elements of equity and justice and inclusivity is mainstreamed in all our policies and programs and ideas that we put forth. And I would say this isn't just true for energy transition. I mean, if you look at AI, for example, right? We have AI threats, we have data security concerns. India is doing some great work and really leading a lot of that work in this space now. And also data centers are actually going to be one of the largest sources of emissions today. So that's how tech and emissions and energy also really overlap. So energy is so cross-cutting and so overlapping that it's very unfair and difficult to sort of pigeonhole it into one single category. And I want to maybe later also talk about how we can maybe think through elements of equity and inclusivity in 4 broad pillars that are cross-cutting in this theme, which is tech, finance, regulations, and geopolitics. So we'll come to that later.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. They've been very interesting. I'm gonna pick up where Shubha started a very interesting conversation here around the fact that there are so many there's so many intersections here, like from water to employment to the economy to energy, and all of these factors kind of pose to us this wicked problem of how do you solve all of these together. And I think on that front, I think it'd be interesting to know what are approaches that people are taking to solve these, and what are examples of how multitude of these factors are being effectively framed into solutions or policies or interventions, and how is it that the policy making process is trying to grapple with all of these and answer questions that cut across boundaries.
So continuing from what Mannat said, that it's something like an energy transition, as we. It's a very easy phrase to sort of throw about, right? And the coal conversation, phase out, phase down, etc. And that's what we do in negotiations. But what we realized, and CW deals with data and research, is that we don't have enough data to take informed decisions, right? So all of these recommendations and such come from parachuted top-down prescriptions. This is how we should do it. Let's move a bunch of people away from geography. That's not how it works, right? You cannot empty out Jharkhand. It's not a... So what we started doing, and that has been a learning experience and we send all our researchers first to the field, that please go and understand what is going on, to actually collect data and then sort of derive from that where the real problem is. So I'll give a very quick small example, which is on the ground, and someone can say that, okay, this is not a green transition. So we work with the brass cluster of Moradabad, and that's called the Brass City, and they have this 500, 600-year-old businesses that are doing heritage. Now, they have small houses, which are like maybe they're smaller than the stage, where they have holes in the ground where they are burning coal to melt the brass. And they've been doing it for 500 years. Now, we can say that they're polluting their own health, they're polluting the area, they're doing all this. But there is no way to put even distributed renewable energy in that place. It is so dense and it's not practical. So we worked, for example, with the city gas system, and we worked with a startup that devised a furnace where we could use residential gas supply to replace that coal, so that these people could melt the brass at a lower temperature in a device without the emissions and without displacing them, right? Because the first question cannot be, what else can these people do? They cannot do anything else. They don't want to do anything else. But this is required for us to go into Moradabad, first of all, speak with them. Then you talk to the city gas people, you talk to the regulation people. That's what you were saying, that there's tech, there's finance, there's regulations, there's policy. Now SIDBI has to give certain loans. This thing costs 1 lakh. Even that they cannot afford, right? I mean, most of us have phones that cost more than that, but they cannot afford it. So policy making, and then there's of course a populist aspect of policy making, right? Because we're electoral democracy, so you cannot force people to do certain things. So that is where your wicked problem is. And the phrase that was used by Mr. Sinha before this was evolutionary. So now you can say that you've transitioned these people from coal to natural gas, but that's not green, but that is sustainable. So the word sustainable becomes important over here, that it can be sustained till we find a way to go fully green. Volkswagen yesterday was in the news, I don't know how many of you saw it, they're shutting all their plants in Germany because they've lost the EV battle to China, which is fine, it's a good headline. Now I wanna ask if those people who are in Germany who are gonna lose their jobs in the onset of winter, are they really concerned about the EV at this point or their livelihood at this point? And that is basically where the values 20 conversation has to come in, that right, we're gonna balance the equity and the inclusion, but we're also going to balance the sustainability, not from just the green point of view. And that is what is making us question, why are we doing, what are we doing, from whom and with what outcome? Instead of saying, okay, I have a mandate to sort of implement JETP in India. Right, I mean, we've reversed the program a bit.
So, from the industry perspective, I think from what we run, Climate Group proposes, we are very careful in terms of not pushing inflation because RE has a downside as well, because in India, in countries like India, where the solar modules are primarily imported and the cost of manufacturing modules in India are pretty high. A very fast transition could also mean putting inflation or increasing inflation in India. And that's where we are also very careful in terms of how we push a campaign like RE100. On just transition from the industry perspective, we are doing an interesting project in India, which is Responsible Energy Initiative, and it's in partnership with CEW and a couple of other CSOs. This is a project to build a wireframe, a toolkit for the industry, companies who procure renewable energy, to ensure that the electricity which they procure is coming from projects which are being developed in a just way. This wireframe or a toolkit will enable companies to question their developers and question them about how land siting was done, what kind of community development was done, whether skill development of the affected communities were done, health and safety, etc. So from the industry perspective, I think this is what we are working on, and we're very careful and vigilant about what is happening, how industries are doing, because again, irrational scale up of RE can really affect a lot of people.
I'm going to have to request you to repeat the question because there have been such interesting comments that I was so absorbed. I think I lost track.
No worries. I think you're free to comment on their comments as well. But on the larger scheme of things, I think I was just trying to get a sense of, since we have so many interacting facets within the energy transition, economic growth as a whole, water, employment, solving these problems sometimes feel daunting, or they seem like wicked, unsolvable problems. So if there are examples or interventions that you've seen that have managed to grapple with some of them together, and what are paths that we can all think about when we try to solve problems in different domains with similar approaches?
Well, that's a very big question. But if I were to very briefly answer that, because I can see you have a couple of more questions, you've been looking at that, so I want to give you that time. But I think, so again, if I go back to say tech, right, there's so much scope for South-South collaboration. There's so much, potential. We keep talking about tech transfer, for example, but that's never going to happen. I mean, there is technology out there, go and buy it. No one is stopping you. No one's stopping India to go to the market and buy any kind of tech. The problem is it's too expensive for us to buy. So the issue is more of finance than availability of tech. Yes, of course, there is a lot of more need. I mean, when we talk about Make in India, there is a scope and potential to innovate. And therefore, now, especially with the government coming out with a particular fund for R&D, which is a great push for, a very Make in India and Design in India effort and initiative as well, which is quite commendable and admirable. So I think there is a lot of scope in terms of tech. How do you collaborate within the country as well, between institutes, between think tanks, between, innovative, venture capitalist firms, and also globally, particularly among the South-South nations, because there is a lot of potential, a lot of synergy to explore economies of scale. Africa, for example, is very mineral and resource rich, but sometimes they lack the knowledge and the capacity to be able to extract that for their advantage. And then we have some other South countries who are penetrating the market already. So there's the great competition, right? Which it's famously called. So yes, that's one on tech. In terms of finance, for example, particularly in India, there is a lot of scope on green bonds. The government has also been pushing for sovereign green bonds. We still haven't managed to reach the scale and extract its true potential. But I think more particularly in terms of municipal green bonds, they're doing very well. Right, with Indore, with Guwahati, with a couple of other smaller units. I think it's a great way for, it's very sub-federal, so it allows greater autonomy. It's more federal in its sort of structure. It gives more legitimacy. And at the same time, it's a great way of sort of raising more private capital and being able to infuse more money and not just entirely relying on, say, public debt and public capital, for example. So that's the other bit. Third is, I think, in terms of solutions, I agree with what Shiva said. Minilaterals sometimes don't always work, but we're just hoping with, particularly around critical minerals, we've created, and we're doing a lot of work, for example, in Latin America, trying to send delegations, partnering with Australia, with Argentina, and looking at mineral exploration. So I think there is scope there, because one other big challenge is how do we sort of make our supply chains more resilient, right? And I think this is something which is not always understood to that great extent, because if you think of the fossil fuel era, there wasn't so much monopolization at that point. Or, because say one of the biggest producers of oil and supplies is Saudi, which supplies close to 15% of the global oil supply, which isn't much. You think of lithium, Australia 50%, Congo, cobalt 50%. You think of rare earths, China 80%, processing 80 to 90%. So that is massive monopolization. So if you compare it to the fossil fuel era, we're actually going to worse times. So yes, energy transition is going to come and save us all, but we all don't always have those answers, and things are actually going to be more difficult than we anticipate. So supply chains, sort of vulnerability is a big concern. There is scope now. India, for example, is tying up with Australia to look at lithium exploration, with Indonesia in nickel, with Latin American countries, particularly the lithium triangle, which is Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. So there is some work happening there, and I think that's also great potential. And that's something you can only do with collaborating with other international, in the international sphere, because there's so much you can do by yourself.
Thank you. Honestly, I am the moderator, but I'm going to chime in a little bit as well. It's just way too attractive of a conversation. I think, Shiva, I absolutely agree with you as far as the data element of it goes. We work in industrial energy efficiency in developing countries, and trust me, nobody is measuring anything. So before you can start sizing out your renewables or deciding how much batteries to get, we've got to have a demand side approach to be actually considering all of this and understanding where the problem is. And there is a lot of low-hanging fruit out there that we are not capturing, and especially in cost-sensitive countries like the developing world, those are things we really need to get a move on to unlock. Beyond data as well, I think the other macro questions are also very real, right? Especially when it comes to access of finance, technology transfer, or intellectual property sharing. I've had the pleasure a little bit of doing technology transfer agreements and also working within different developing countries. And the thing is that it is very clear that the technology from the West is too expensive, and we must build inside our own countries if we are to sell to the developing world. We are to collaborate with each other, because it's only India that can build technology that's affordable in Brazil or in Argentina. If you intend to export it from Northern Europe, like, the price points just don't cut it. So I think lots of interesting challenges, but when it comes to, very often this conversation finds its way back to finance in the way that it is a money problem. And some people say, no, actually, it is a project and opportunity problem. They are not aligning with themselves, or it is a transparency problem if it comes to funding or aid initiatives. So as far as the money behind the problems go, what is your opinion? And I'd love to get your take from a policy perspective, your take from a industrial and funding perspective, and yours from a technology transfer, and what does it mean from a larger financing perspective. So,
yeah, and just to add to Mannat's tech point, tech transfer, since you also mentioned it, tech is also a strategic advantage to countries that develop tech. And we saw that during COVID also, that if you develop the vaccine, you monetize the vaccine. So tech transfer, again, means that the countries that have expended resources, they would want to share a strategic advantage with you. And that's the geopolitical question. It's not even about finance or things like that. They just wouldn't do that, because it removes their strategic advantage. So energy or any commodity, when you talk about monopolization, that's an advantage that a country has, right? So they don't want to share that for obvious reasons. So we have to be practical about all of these things. And the value chains are also far more complex now than a commodity value chain of oil and coal, because, even if you take a solar panel, it's not a commodity like oil, right? It has got so many moving parts that is coming from different sources. But coming to the complexity of value chains and tech is really becoming more and more evident as we look at it. So, but the financing problem is not a matter of the amount or the project, it's a matter of risk and credit rating. So, which is why I said that who decides who gets the money is where the problem is. So if you go to see multilateral lending, then there are 3 credit rating agencies that do that, all global north. So none of our projects, no matter what creditworthiness they actually have, due to risks or perceived risks or actual or perceived risks, they will never have an A+ or AA rating. So your cost of lending will be so high. It doesn't matter what project you are doing. You just can't afford it, because some arbiter is saying that, giving you this money is at risk. If you look at the data, again, I go back to that, some of these global south countries, again, have much lower NPAs than global north. US debt is $35 trillion. No global south country has that debt risk, right? But on paper, no. So India, for example, is exploring its own credit rating mechanism. If we come up with something like that, then we can deploy it to global south countries. The second thing with tech, for example, again, IPR systems, mostly global north, so indigenous technology, which can be cheaper, more practical, localized to the situation. This is where the education part comes in that we're talking about, innovation, will not be recognized or funded because it's not legitimized by the global north's IP system, right? So again, it goes back to who's deciding if it's funding worthy. Same goes for projects. So it's all chicken and egg, like, okay, prove that the project is profitable. Then only private sector comes in, but private sector is taking cues from whom? The global lenders, right? So, which is why we are now at the global south level, and when we're working with Brazil on this, South Africa is going to be working on this as well, and it's become very, very important for us to define our own taxonomies. Whoever defines the taxonomy controls the value chain or the IPR or the tech, because they're defining the rules-based architecture that we play by. So that is my take. I think we have ground-up work to do here, and India needs to really be leading. I think Brazil can be a great ally, the BRICS forums, the G20 itself, beyond the UN system, I would say. It has to become more strategic in its functioning rather than just reacting to inputs that we get.
So one question that we are often asked is that why does climate group only work with the demand side? And an important reason for this is that energy transition or even promoting low emission steel will require huge investments. It's humongous in terms of billions of dollars. And what we try to ensure is that we create demand so that at least the supply side is comfortable in making those investments. And then we also push the government to provide subsidies and grants. Say, for example, last week we were having a discussion. We conducted one forum on low emission steel in Bombay. And we discussed that about 10.5 billion euros have been given by various countries in Europe to the steel mills, steel producers to incentivize production of low emission steel. Now in India, we anticipate that steel consumption will become 2x in the next 30 odd years. And this will lead to doubling of emissions as well. So there is direct correlation. In case of India, switching from a blast furnace, which is an old technology, to an electric arc furnace will require $225 billion. And who's going to fund it? So the partnership, the government-private partnership has to be there. Otherwise, this transition will just not be possible and meaningful.
And I think I'll echo and I completely agree with what all three of you said before this. Just to maybe add to that, I think I look at the finance problem from, the demand and the supply side both. And of course, you look at it from an international and a very domestic perspective, because that's also very, very dynamic and different. I think when we look at it from demand and supply, say just in the case of India or any country for that matter, but mostly in developing countries, the supply is mostly dominated by the banking system, right? Majority of it is debt driven and it's driven by the banks. How do we make sure we have more capital infusion coming in from the capital market? So how do we strengthen our bond market and equity market and encourage more innovative instruments like, say, securitization, which is very popular as a means to be able to mobilize greater resources and channelize towards more specific projects like green energy. So I think developing and strengthening capital markets would be very instrumental in mobilizing more private capital, because there's only as much as public capital can do. What it can do definitely is in terms of providing more guarantees and backing to these projects. They may not be able to provide the capital, but they certainly can provide and help mitigate the risk that Shobha spoke about for private capital to come in and put their buck on it. So that's on the supply side. I think on the demand side, like Sir mentioned that the demand for, say, green steel is going to increase. Steel is going to increase in the next couple of years. We have a lot of very inward-looking domestic policies like the CBAM, the IRA coming about, which is going to really change the way we also engage with carbon pricing. So these instruments like carbon pricing will also become very prominent. And also, I think that's why I think the role of negotiations becomes so important, because we all believe that CBAM is, in a way, and I'm going to use a very extreme term, is quite despotic, right? It is despotic. I mean, it's absolutely unfair. India's per capita emissions are one of the lowest in the world. Africa it's abysmally low. Energy poverty is such a concern for countries like India, Brazil, Indonesia, and of course Africa. And you cannot expect us to be paying those kind of fines and penalties just because you are. And to be very honest, I think we all know this by now, and we've had enough conversations to also understand that environmental protection is really a smokescreen for trade protectionism. It's everything to do with economics, is very little to do with the environment. So I think we can get that sort of facade and narrative out of the window and really talk business. So now if you want to talk business, let's talk finance. And I think, yes, and that's where I think when we talk about the international and domestic paradigm about MDBs, for example, how do we ensure there's more concessional capital? There's a lot of work that, in fact, we're doing a roundtable where Shobha will also be joining us at ORF on Monday, which will look at MDB reforms, right? How do we ensure implementation of the capital adequacy frameworks? There is a lot of legroom for MDBs to be able to lend more money. to developing countries at very concessional rates. How do we do that? How do we look at really modifying the methodologies of credit rating agencies? Because they have been following that for the past 40, 50 years. Those methodologies haven't changed and evolved at all when all the problems around the world have completely turned around, right? I mean, yes, poverty is still a problem, but it's not as dramatic a problem it was 30, 40 years ago. Today, we have bigger issues like climate change, tech threats. And I think they also need to be able to reevaluate their risk matrices, which is more aligned with the current realities and challenges of the world. So I think, so that MDBs and other governments and institutional investors can really lend based on the real risk and not so much the perceived risk, which is often what developing countries are penalized with and burdened with that premium. So I think on the international level, role of MDBs, role of institutional investors, they have large pools of capital. Institutional investors are, I think, one of the biggest source of capital that can come into the space. But again, because of ratings, because of certain preconceived notions, because of also governments, and that's when I come to the domestic part, where we also need to have the capacity to absorb that capital. I can easily say I need 300 million or 2 trillion or whatever, but where is that money going to go? What are you going to invest it in? We don't have a pipeline of projects ready. And I think there is some momentum to build it, but it's not fast enough. And I think when you spoke about examples, NIIF is a very good example of the kind of work that they are spearheading in India, which is the National Infrastructure Investment Fund. Yeah, acronyms are an issue, but they're always like a tongue twister for me. But yeah, so I think NIIF is a very classic example, and they're doing some great work partnering with, for example, recently they've come up with something called the Green Growth Equity Fund with the FCDO from the UK. And they put in, I think, close to about 120 million each, and they're looking at investing into climate tech startups in India. So that's a phenomenal example of partnership, of technology development and innovation, of trying to mobilize finance and private capital into the space. So it really brings together all the elements that we've spoken about with just one initiative, right? So we need to really think out of the box and build more institutions and build more initiatives such as that, which can really push the needle in the right direction.
Thank you, Mana. That actually was pretty holistic. It covered all the elements. I think what I'm hearing from the panel is that it's actually not a money problem, but a money plumbing problem. That the foundations, be it the credit rating systems, be it the actual flow of capital, the demand for capital, those are the things that are actually constraining our ecosystems. And now considering the larger values 20 conversation, the G20 leadership coming up from Brazil, do you have advice for what are the key steps, or what are initiatives or parts that we as the developing world or the global south or what have you should start laying the foundations for? Because clearly this is a problem that we will have to solve for ourselves. And so what are some actionable policies or actionable advice that you could give for the G20 leadership of Brazil to take as priorities when it comes to low cost financing, like sustainable like project development, justice, equity, doing all of this in a more holistic fashion? What is the new plumbing we need to build?
So one of the things that we, in fact, talked about this at Indonesia, even before Brazil, we came up with a T20 research platform, because something that at least collates the knowledge or even the problem for that matter. So the problem is not siloed or subnational. How do you make it a G20 level problem, right? So we started a research platform in Bali. I don't quite know what happened to that. Now at Brazil T20, and I'm a co-chair of one of their task forces, and we're trying to have a policy implementation roadmap that, because of the G20 structure, that the secretariat changes, so priorities change and things just dissipate. We don't want that to happen. And we have become very aware over the Indonesian, Indian, and now Brazilian, and the South Africans already part of the conversation, to not let the gains be lost or not let the conversations be lost. So one is to have repositories. So we are in fact talking to several education institutions in India to start research on G20, BRICS, multilaterals, quadrilaterals, because there's a history to how they evolve, right? And we don't have that historical knowledge. So what we're doing is we're reacting in the moment. And that's what, when Manat says something like, something that started IBRD and all in 1944, 45, we don't have the same problems right now. But who's tracking it? And again, data, right? So one is to have these platforms that we set up in each G20 somehow make sure that they survive and then thrive. And I think when they were talking about values 20 not dissipating by itself, right? I mean, how do you keep it going? How do you keep it relevant is the question. And so that means the Brazilian values 20 and then South African values 20 has to continue this conversation, not only at the G20, but also at other political moments. So COP29, Brazil's COP30. Before that, we have financing for development to 2025. We have the ANGA, the Summit of the Future, which India, of course, has said that we're not even part of the UNSC, etc. So it's all Summit of the Past, we have called it. So, you know, that shows a lack of faith we have in the transformative powers of the existing processes. So these new institutions, whether G20, whether a BRICS thing, whether a quad thing, whoever it is, has to somehow have longevity beyond that event. How do we do that? Do the countries come together and maintain something? Who contributes to that? Who funds that thing? Even that research platform has to be funded, right? I mean, we go back to that funding problem. But the one good thing that I would say, and I don't want to sound morose, I think, you know, my colleagues and my peers and my seniors in these various countries that I speak with, the thought process has changed. We are just not throwing words like inclusive around anymore. We're like, break it down, what is inclusive? So there has been a significant transition in the conversation between 5 years ago to now. The Paris Agreement itself is not taken for granted. The $100 billion is not taken for granted. The NCQG, explain how you're going to do it. Don't just say that you're going to do an NCQG of a new target of 100 plus. So questioning these questions, which is what I started with, has become important, and I see everybody now being forced, whether they want to or not, to have to break it down.
So Climate Group was also a B20 member last year, and one of the important policy suggestions that we made was on for countries to collaborate on transfer of technology, because in India we need technologies which can be absorbed. It shouldn't be expensive. There have been instances where there have been a lot of techs available, but they can't be taken by the Indian companies and adopted because of the cost implications. So collaborations by either through bilateral tie-ups or directly for transfer of technology, especially on energy transition, production of low emission steel, low emission concrete needs to be done, and we'll reiterate that if given a chance.
So I think there's a lot that again can be said on this, but if I was to honestly just pick one recommendation to give, and it's something very close to my heart, and I think it aligns very well with the ideas of values and people positivity, is investing in human capital. I think that is something which is so undervalued. We talk about it, but it really underpins everything we want to do. I mean, an educated workforce is going to be an innovative workforce. Only then can they build the tech that we talk about so much. A healthy workforce is going to be able to be productive, to be able to step out of their house and work and really ideate. Whether it comes to finance, policy, tech, I think the underpinning and foundation is a good investment in human capital, which is skilling, education, healthcare, all of that. And I think we have such a demographic dividend. We have such an advantage of a very thriving population, of a young population with so much scope and potential, which is an absolute waste if we fail them by not really, making those investments in people. So I think I'll end with the people positive attribute we started with.
I think that makes a lot of sense as well, especially considering that it is the developing world that has the younger populations, and education as a lever does provide incredible power, and it requires money in a very different way as opposed to capital financing of projects, but the impact is exponential and disproportionate. I think, yeah.
Education, just not in the conventional sense, but for example, India has such great ITIs. Why can't we just expand that to build like an entire cadre of energy and transition workforce? Like for example, Germany is a classic case, right? They have a very great vocational education program which complements their conventional education program as well, and it's equal, and there's a lot of dignity of work in either. There is a lot of respect and equitability. So I think that mindset change is also important. It's not just the school or collegiate education, it's vocational education as well, which honestly is what's also required. A majority of the workforce will be employed in that. So yeah.
I could not agree more. This is like, as we build out service fleets of project engineers, we feel it every day that we've got, fleets of ITIs, but the talent coming out of there, the kinds of training that you require, upskilling, and these are problems that, funnily enough, the West is facing as well. Like if you look at heat pump installation engineers in Europe, like when the Ukraine crisis happened, that was the pain point. They couldn't scale it because of installation. So I think human capital around the energy transition, I think it kind of touches all the key threads, right? You get to employ people, you get to foster economic growth. We ourselves see it with the capability centers around energy analytics, because India was part of the IT revolution, but I think similarly now we can pioneer the energy analytics and the demand side information management revolution as well. If you were just to take the same capabilities and look at them from a different lens, but yeah.
Can't resist to make one last point, but I think the other sad bit would be if the winners from the fossil fuel era become the winners of the energy transition era. We see the same people investing in fossil fuels and now they're investing in the transition landscape. So there is no opportunity for other people to rise. And I think that's the equity and value question we need to answer, that how do we open the space up for everyone to participate, and not just the the big folks who had the fossil money and they're moving it to now the energy money to make more money for themselves. So that's the issue.
And we don't, as climate group, we don't work with anyone who is in aviation, fossil fuel, anything of that sort. So we are no legacy issues.
Anything you want to say, Shiva, to contribute to this discussion?
I got it. I was part of the .com era, right? So I'm that old, but when I start after my MBA, the first job I did was in .com before the bust of .com. So I wanted to echo what you were saying, that and what Manna just said, and she actually took the words out of my mouth, that the new energy era, or the new tech era, is not the old era. We have an opportunity here to become the leader. Right, because we are not trailing and we are not following up. Some generation gaps leapfrogs, as we call it, have happened. So, that is the thing. Do we make the most of that?
I think we touched on it in the beginning about data centers and energy consumption, and I feel that there is such an evolution happening even on the demand side in those regards, where energy consumption in the US, for example, is going to go through the roof, all focused around artificial intelligence and security. And on the other side, you would have countries like India that are trying to keep their grid powered and to provide affordable energy to a growing population, where the economics of it continue to get harder every year. And I think there are some institutional or structural issues also that our part of the world faces. I think in India, the grid is a very good example of something that's been a wicked, unsolvable problem for a very, very long time. So I just want to get all of your opinions on the structural issues, the infrastructure issues. There are some path dependencies that our worlds have been caught in to some extent. How do we escape that? How do we, what are areas for the leapfrogging? What are ways that we can escape the shackles of the fossil fuel companies and the world, and break into this new world?
So just India right now is undergoing 4 types of energy transition. So one would be from traditional sources to modern sources. So you have coal and I'm not going to say coal, I'll say biomass, cow dung, going into, let's say, Ujjwala Yojana. That's one transition. Our populations are moving from rural to urban areas, so that is a transition. We ourselves are moving to development on a low carbon trajectory, which itself is challenging. The fourth part would be sort of being part of the global value chains and such that we spoke of. Now, we are all doing this with very aging infrastructure. Though infrastructure investment has picked up, we have a very low taxpayer base, as you know, but we also have a lot of resistance to ground up development. And when we speak of resilient infrastructure, in fact, and we are not talking of that, ensuring our infrastructure for longer term use, which kind of gets you investment. These are not mainstream conversations yet. One of the challenges we have, but we have seen states respond very, very positively, is comprehensive state action plans. So now when they're investing, and if you've seen all the state investment jamborees that they have, we've told them that, look, instead of all of you competing for the same bucket and same projects, why don't you find specific strategic advantages at the state level? And one district, one product was sort of something that attempted that. But structurally, what the states are doing now is they're looking at their water level, their resources, their freight corridors, their highway, their structure. And if some of them can improve, it becomes a model for other states to improve rather than a top-down national grid fixing. You see what? Because all states are also not the same. If we're saying all global south is not the same, all our states are not the same. But that is again where liquidity for your country comes in, and some of that MDB money has to come in to get your private players to invest. Now, we have 3 or 4 big players like Ambani or Reliance or Adani Group that are actually investing in infrastructure, but we need like people who make substation components. You would be aware of that. Like, who are the MSMEs in this business, right? The MSME, if that construct is not clear, your value chain is not stable. So where are the gaps in that? And for that, again, we have started going very micro. One is a macro thing, but where is the agricultural feeder kept? What are the risks to that? The sub-district level risks to everything. Water table, what is the climate risk? Where is your labor force? The labor force can't move around. We have to keep them where they belong. The food profile, heat and sustainability. I mean, we are looking at losing 5% of our GDP to just heat and humidity in the next 20 years. That's a huge equity issue because people can't even cool themselves. Cooling is an elite activity in India, right? I mean, it's not a commonplace activity. So we are, the nodal ministries, which earlier used to work in silos, now have started working horizontally, which I think is great. The Prime Minister's Advisory Council has started consulting with a lot of people like us. They're looking at data that is coming from our research, which is very important. India's research has to be respected. Earlier, we used to not kind of do this sort of ground-up research. The IITs, the vocational training, employability as we call it, right? Not just a degree that you have. An employable workforce that serves these new sectors. I think it's also moving very fast, right? How many years has it been since we started doing all this, right? 3, 4, 5 years. America has had 300 years. We've not had that time to do it. So, but by 2047, if we have to be a developed economy, we have to move really fast. So I think we can do it.
Yeah. Kinshuk and I'd have to cap you guys off, both of you, at like minute, and then we'll just close.
Sure, 30 seconds. So one of the important and interesting aspects that we have discovered while promoting renewable electricity is that the situation and the state of discoms in India is extremely poor. And that is the reason discoms do not promote renewable electricity transmission, because it will end up losing their customers eventually. Best customers, exactly. And what we really want to do is actually build a model that will be inclusive for discoms, and then only we see that RE can be adopted all across different sectors in India.
So I think you've spoken about the discoms, so I'm not going to repeat that, but I think DRE, and I know Shubha mentioned the challenges, how it's not always applicable, but it is a very important tool to look at last mile access in rural and remote regions in India even today. Having said that, battery storage is still a challenge for us, so I think looking at those challenges. At the same time, I feel like, with India, we don't need to always compete with, say, China, because it's going to take us forever. Like, oh, I want to build solar cells, but it's going to take you 30, 40 years, and we don't have that kind of time. So we need to really start building things and investing in, say, alternate chemistries, right, for those batteries. So doing things that haven't been done before, so that gives us that Ricardo's advantage that we talk about. So that's, I think, one in terms of renewables. Looking at, again, hydrogen CCUS, why they're supremely critical very quickly is, in India and most countries, renewable energy transport and energy decarbonization is already underway, right? I'm not going to get into the details of that, but the big issue is how do you transition hard to abate sectors? Because while 50% of the energy comes from, the energy sources, the emissions come from energy sources, but about 50% come from processes. And there are no alternatives to that. So that's where hydrogen and CCUS will play a very, very important role. And that's one big bottleneck in being able to transition these sectors. And we can't achieve net zero until we manage to sort of combat this problem. And I think third is around material and energy efficiency, because material efficiency and circularity, I believe, can reduce carbon emissions by about 40% globally, which is a big number. So I think that's the low-hanging fruit we need to look at. And yeah.
Well, with that, thank you everybody for listening in. This has been a very interesting panel for me. Personally, engaging with everybody, we can talk about it all day. But I think I'm going to end the panel on a very classic Shiv quote. When we joined tGELF, he'd always tell us there was this Margaret Mead quote, which was that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think the Values 20 group, all of us here, the teams in Brazil, people joining in, this is the start of that group of committed citizens. And hopefully, we can do our part in changing the world. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
I would like to request our panelists to take a group photo first, followed by our tokens of appreciation. Thank you, everyone, for that enlightening discussion. Now, in case anybody has any questions for the panelists, you can ask them in the roundtable discussion segment that will follow. Then, meanwhile, I would now like to thank everyone for their participation. It's truly been a pleasure to listen to your valuable insights on such a diverse range of subjects. Without any further ado, I would now like to inform the audience that after taking a small break for tea and coffee, we will be moving into the roundtable discussion session after 10 to 15 minutes. The online participation will conclude here. I would once again like to express my sincerest gratitude to the members that have joined us from all around the world via Zoom. We look forward to seeing you soon. Key takeaways from the in-person roundtables will be collated and shared with all the virtual attendees after the event has concluded. Similarly, the submissions from the form that was shared with the virtual attendees at the start of proceedings will be collated and shared with the in-person attendees after the event as well. Now, I know it's been a long afternoon. I would like to request everyone to proceed for high tea, and everybody, once having collected their snacks and coffee and tea, can come and join the roundtables. Before we move, I would just like to explain what the roundtable segment is. Within this segment, participants will be divided into pre-decided areas of interest, which are our three task forces: ecological transition and nature's wisdom, evolutionary education, and inclusive leadership. Each group will aim to reach a consensus on the most urgent policy recommendations within these thematic areas. And these recommendations will then be summarized and forwarded to the V20 Brazil team. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patience. I would like to request you to move